All right, thanks, Evelyn. And hello, Dr. Eve. My name is Kimberly Knight. I'll be serving as your moderator for this panel today. It's a pleasure to see you.
Absolutely. Good afternoon, everyone. It's exciting to be here. What a great session we have had all day long. Really excited to be here.
This has been amazing. I've been
Absolutely.
checking out the sessions and then we kick it off the morning with our keynote
Mhm.
speaker. And it's just been a wonderful array of women of so many different disciplines and just backgrounds and giving so much, not only life advice, professional advice, and just giving us so much today. So as we come into being that closing out panel, I really am excited to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion. I feel like everything else built up to here. So, and hello to all that are watching and sticking with us to the very end. We are so thankful for you. I just want to acknowledge and thank Substantial Magazine and Gregory Hedgepeth and Evelyn for all their work that they're doing to have this wonderful conference take place. So, we're going to get started, everyone. All right. And so, the first question I have for you is, what does diversity look like and mean to you? Just a quick answer that you have about that, and anyone can go at this time.
I'll go. When I saw this question, of course, I always like to assess what is really being asked of me. And so when I think about diversity, you can't really separate diversity and inclusion, in my opinion. And so when I think about that, I think about how dimensional it is and the internal way, the way people are born, and then how we're socialized, and then our functions in society and the worldviews. But my single most important one for me is a quote, um, um, and that is from one man. God made every nation of the human race, that they should inhabit the whole earth. And that's Acts 17 and 26. It is within this greater context of unity that humanity's diversity rightfully appears. And that's how I see diversity.
Thank you, Dr. Eve. And my apologies. I wanted to give each of you space and time to introduce yourselves. I just jumped right in. But Dr. Eve, I'll start with you. I thought that was a very beautiful response, and thank you for that quote. If you don't mind, I'm going to go around and have everyone introduce themselves briefly. Thank you.
Sure. So I'm Dr. Eve, and I am the executive director with North Carolina Black Women Roundtable, but I'm also the founder of Audacity Group Social Enterprise. I've also been a nonprofiteer since 2001, and I'm also the author of my life. My story is my business, Eveangel Savage LLC, along with many other endeavors. And yeah, that's who I am.
I love that, the author of my life. That is beautiful. Miss Jacobs, can you go next for us, please, to introduce yourself?
Yes, ma'am. My name is Toya Jacobs, and I'm the Diversity and Inclusion Program Manager in the Office for Equity and Diversity at East Carolina University. Yes.
And Miss Ferguson, yes. Miss Ferguson, you're
Yes,
next.
hello. I'm Jackie Ferguson. I'm the head of content and programming for the diversity movement. I'm a writer, advocate, and business consultant that uses a DEI lens to create inclusive cultures within organizations.
Wonderful. I love a writer. I'm one myself. And Miss Taylor, you go next for.
Good afternoon. I am Annette Taylor, and I am currently serving in the role of Minority Business Outreach and Inclusion Manager at the North Carolina Education Lottery. So I'm on a journey in a new role, and look forward to sharing that with you. But I'm mostly advocating for minority businesses and our minority stakeholders.
Awesome. Congratulations on that new position. And hello, everyone out there that may not know me as well. My name is Kimberly Knight. I am a clinical social worker by day, but I'm also a lifestyle blogger. The blog is called the Lux Blog NC, and I'm an editor for that blog. I'm a contributing writer to Essence and Sheen magazine, and I'm the founder of Black Indians NC, which is a nonprofit that is forming to support African American and Indigenous people across North Carolina and beyond. So that's a little bit about me. So I'm going to revisit our first question because I was so anxious to jump right in. And we can go this time, Ms. Jacobs, for you about what does diversity look like and mean to you?
Okay. Diversity looks like individuals bringing their, well, I'm moving into inclusion, which, like Dr. Eve said, it to me, diversity has been defined. I'd really like, if you don't mind, Kimberly, to jump into individuals. Diversity means to me all aspects of individuals, whether it be mental, physical, emotional, any way that individuals show up individually or collectively. And I'd like to speak on inclusion, if I may. It's an opportunity to make sure that all of those individuals, whatever system or process or movement that they show up into, that they feel included, that they feel like they can be their authentic self, whether it be in the classroom, on campus for me at ECU, or in Greenville, Pitt County, because all of that matters, not just the institution itself. So that's what it means to me. And I show up every day at work for that purpose. And everything I do is to make sure that people feel included.
And I can tell you, I appreciate all that you've done over the years, because being someone that also attended East Carolina University, your light shined to me even way back then in the early 2000s. I'm not going to age myself for the panel, but just.
Well, you just aged me.
But I just really appreciate so much all that you have done. So yes, Ms. Ferguson, your thoughts.
And next year will give me 21 years. So
wow.
Congratulations.
April 1st. And to see so many of my students today, I've been on the verge of tears. Y'all know I'm an emotional person, but I have been on the verge of tears to see the excellence of what you all have been always that I knew, to see that coming to fruition. I mean, I hired Greg Hedgepeth his first semester at Ladonia Wright Cultural Center.
Yes.
And that young man showed up in a tie as a first semester freshman for his interview at the Cultural Center. And he's been one of my babies ever since. So yeah.
Yes, and I definitely appreciate all that the Cultural Center offered to us students on campus. It definitely was filled with diversity, inclusion, and equity, just like we're talking today. So Thank you so much for your service for that. Ms. Ferguson, what does it mean to you, diversity? What does that look like and mean to you?
Sure. Well, diversity to me is about people. Just echoing what the other panelists said, embracing different backgrounds, cultures, identities, abilities, experiences. And there's a misconception, right, that diversity means race, gender, and sexual orientation, but it applies to everyone. It's, if you think about your personality, your personal experiences, your family, every part of who you are brings a breadth of perspectives to how you think, how you problem solve, how you communicate and absorb information, and how you work.
Does, and thank you for bringing up those key points. Sometimes we think it's limited to just these areas, but it's so much inclusionary. So I think it's so important to bring light to that. Thank you. Ms. Taylor, what are your thoughts on diversity and what that looks like and mean to you?
Absolutely what everyone else has said, especially the thought coming from Jackie, is that it's about people and it's about all of their differences, and how everything about their disabilities and all. I mean, the truth of the matter is that we all know diversity is a fact. I mean, that's all it is. And it's about what all folks have to offer, their diversity, their mindset, the talents, skills they bring, really just who they are. And it's not limited to racial equity or racial, to race and ethnicity, as many people think. So I think it's an education for many people that we're finding as we continue on this journey. And I would say that I think we'll get into all of that, but I would say, I think simply put, it's about every person and their gifts and talents.
I totally agree, and I echo what each of you have said today. And then as we're getting to this, we DEI this and diversity, equity, inclusion that, and it's becoming buzzwords and people are just putting it all over social media. But when we get to the core of it, it's like, what are we really breaking down? What does these three terms mean to us? And so when it comes to these three terms and all they looked at, I know Mrs. Jacobs touched on some inclusion as well and equity. If there's any other comments you have when it comes to diversity, equity, inclusion, and what that all means to you, feel free to comment at this time. Dr. Eve, do you have any comments additional?
I think they pretty much have covered most of the across culture and cross domains. I think that when we think about diversity and inclusion, it's critical. Even when we think when you're in Rome, you do as Rome, or it is critical that we don't take that when we go to someone else's home, remember that we are guests. And that we sit at that table as a guest. And when we can think of it that way, we can be a whole lot more respectful of the culture, whatever that culture is, wherever we're sitting in that time.
Very profound, very profound. Mrs. Jacobs, you have anything else to add to that question?
Not. Just would hope that we will touch eventually on the intersectionality of how we show up, especially as women of color, Black women specifically.
Yes, can't wait to get to that. Ms. Ferguson, any last thoughts on that first question?
The one thing that I would add is just, very often organizations and people lump diversity, equity, and inclusion together as one. You certainly, as was said earlier, you can't leverage diversity without inclusion, but understanding that those are three separate concepts, equity being more about processes and policies that are in place, and inclusion being more about participation. As Toya said earlier, it's important to know that those are three separate concepts that have to be leveraged together in order to see meaningful results.
They definitely do. And I think it's so important to know that they all have their solo spaces to exist in. It's not just lumping it all together and making it inclusionary. Ms. Taylor, any final thoughts on that first question?
I would just say to the point that Jackie just made, that couple statements that I like to use when I'm sharing or educating the folks inside the lottery is that diversity is a fact, inclusion is a practice. That is what we are attempting to do, is be inclusive. You have to be intentional and you have to practice it in the various ways and strategies that you come up with as a company. But the true goal is equity. So equity is a goal, diversity is a fact, and inclusion is a practice. And so I think that that's a good way to look at it.
About the diversity being a practice, yes, it is a work that takes time and it takes effort and intentionality to be able to do that. So thank you each for that. So our next question is, what does diverse leadership within an organization do? Do you think there's any disparity between leadership that pays special attention to gender roles, and how has that changed in the conformity? So I know that's a lot in one condensed question, but let's start at the beginning with, what does diverse leadership within an organization do? And we can go with Dr. Eve for that one.
Oh boy, I would have took second to that one.
Okay, well, I'm just going in a little order as I see y'all.
So I'm gonna go. So your question is, what does diversity leadership within an organization do? And then, do you think there is a disparity between leadership that pays special attention to gender roles? I would say, first of all, that diversity, we know, is a fact. It has to happen. It doesn't always, but it should, because again, it is the state of our internal, external of areas of diversity, and it does not always happen, which is why we need leaders like Toya in place, and tables like this. And the tables allow us to be able to host the listening sessions, which are critical, because part of what's happening in our organizations, in my opinion, I'll use the 30 plus years of experience I've had at those tables, is we don't listen. We don't listen to our employees, and they are the ones who are the revenue generating machines behind, or engines behind, the organization. And when we don't do that, we create an environment of that's the morale is low. The morale is low. It doesn't grow its staff. It doesn't include us. It doesn't create a pathway towards a success for those who are committed to the institution. And so I think it's very critical. And now, when it comes to when you speak on gender roles, I believe that's what we were talking about. When I think about gender nonconformity, it's a person's choice. It's a person's choice. And so it's not for us, it's not up for debate. It's not up for me to understand. It's their choice, right? And so so I think that it's critically important that we have a level of respect that for everyone and their choices. And so when I think about that part of the question where it says, do you think there is any disparity between leadership that pays special attention to gender roles? I do believe there is. I believe it begins at the front door. I believe it begins in the process. I believe it begins in hiring, and recruiting. I believe that we have leadership in place that have tainted the culture of the institutions. And so when that happens, it creates an environment within those institutions that's long lasting. It becomes a long lasting practice, and inevitably it poisons the environment. And what happens is we have to wait for them to leave before the culture shifts. And either wait for them to leave or be intentional about our decisions to leave, in knowing. And again, it goes back to all of the amazing panelists who spoke before us, and all of their added value to owning ourselves, understanding who we are, our worthiness. Okay, I'm probably going a little far to the right and left. And
No,
how
but you're
has
hanging in there. You're doing great.
and how has that changed in the wake of gender nonconformity? I think I coupled those. But I
Yeah.
do believe there's a lot of problems and a lot of disparities, and it begins at the front door with our leadership.
Absolutely. I completely agree. Mrs. Jacobs, you have anything to add to this question about what does diverse leadership within an organization do? And I know the further part of the question is, do you think there's any disparity between the leadership that pays special attention to gender roles? How has this changed in the wake of our gender nonconformity when it comes to leadership?
So first of all, diversity in the leadership is lacking in a lot of organizations, which means those organizations are lacking in diversity of thought and experiences when it comes to making decisions for diverse individuals. If everyone at the table of leadership that is making the most urgent and needed decisions at an institution all look the same, then you're lacking something. So diverse leadership, in my opinion, brings about a better business sense. Some people only want to talk about the numbers. Well, let's talk about the numbers of how diversity can enhance our bottom line, or how diversity can enhance not just our dollar, but our brand and who we are. Dr. Eve talked about, sometimes institutions have bad images because of how they either hire people, don't promote people, don't recruit people of color, of people with different diversity dimensions. So diversity in leadership is critical. As it relates to, do you think there is any disparity between leadership that pays special attention to gender roles? We're finding more and more that those people in leadership or institutions that don't pay attention to gender roles are not going to be successful in the future. And how has it changed in the wake of gender nonconformity? You know what? I like Dr. Eve said, gender nonconformity for me is not an issue. I think people should be able to show up into the classroom, the workplace, or wherever they are, and be their true selves, you know. So there's Dr. Ben, and I want to say Savage, but it's not. Dr. Ben, oh, I can't think of his name, but he retired from Duke University.
Mm.
He's their chief diversity officer.
Mm.
And he did a presentation for us where we had to pictures of individuals. Okay, we had to respond to pictures of individuals and give what our first thought was. Well, a lot of people with gender roles and gender nonconformity misgendered people. So I think what we have to realize in higher education, state agencies, corporate America, that gender nonconformity is here. I think it's going to expand, and so we need to get on board with people showing up as their authentic selves, and we need to create environments where they feel safe and to do so.
I love that key point about creating spaces for people to feel safe. I think that's so important. So thank you, Mrs. Jacobs. Ms. Ferguson, do you have anything
Thank you,
to add?
Major Stormer. It is Ben Reese from Duke
Ben
University.
Reese.
Okay. Yeah,
Okay.
Ben Reese. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Ben Reese. Okay, thank you.
Amazing.
Nice. All right, Ms. Ferguson, for this question about what does diversity leadership within an organization do? Having that diverse, how do you feel about that question we've been asking? And do you think there's any disparity between the leadership that pays special attention to gender roles, and how has that changed with the wake of non-gender conformity?
Yeah, so to me, it really depends on, if you're adding a woman or a culturally diverse professional for the picture on your website, you're just checking a box, right? But if you're looking to ensure inclusion, to amplify the voices of these professionals, giving them stretch projects, new responsibilities, not assigning the woman in the room the task of note-taking, right, despite her role. Listening to original ideas and giving people space to help you innovate. And as Toya said, giving them space to be themselves and show up in the way that they are and who they are is so important. You'll end up with a better, more profitable business, and study after study shows that. And then I think we should be moving past gender roles, but implicit bias is a real barrier to that. But I think that thankfully more people are speaking up and asking questions that challenge assumptions. For example, Jackie can't take on this big project because she has kids at home, right? But so does Bob and Steve and Marcus, right? We need to continue to do this work as a collective to ensure that there's equity in the workplace around gender.
I think that is so important, and that women in spaces should feel safe, that they can be promoted to higher level positions and not feel they're compromising their families, because men are not greeted with that same approach when it comes to them wanting to elevate in their career space. So highlights to that. And Ms. Taylor, for that question, what does diverse leadership within an organization do? Do you think there's any disparity between the leadership that has special attention to gender roles, and what has changed in the wake of gender nonconformity to you?
Well, I would echo what everyone has said, but yes, we do know that there is disparity even in leadership. There's disparity in how they pay attention to gender roles. What I would just like to say is that it's important for every company who is truly leaning in on diversity or DEI must create those spaces that we're all saying, like, they must be created. Everyone is not going to embrace it, and that's what we're noticing. It's an ongoing solution. It's an ongoing way of understanding what's happening with diversity just in society. And so there are people who have not retired, who are still there, who just aren't feeling it, and they do not want to be educated. And I think Dr. Eva, someone says sometimes we have to just wait for them to lead to try to move in that place. But true leadership is someone who is open to learns and the courageous conversations and the affinity, the diverse groups of individuals, and also creating a platform for them to speak, but also a way for them to lead. And that is what will generate the understanding that we all need so we can embrace it. Many people don't even understand he, his, and her, he, his, and him, or she, her, and hers, and why that's after their names. I mean, there's so much because they're not attention. So they tend to just, you know, put it behind or let it go or not even think about it. It doesn't become a conversation until it happens and they're like, oh, did I say something wrong or do something wrong? And I think, again, it's important for every company to be looking at it and to not be in the dark ages.
I agree. I think it's definitely where cultural sensitivity coursework and just so many implementations of awareness. I know when I was in graduate school, I took a course that was in safe zone training to work with the LGBTQ plus community. Loved it and enjoyed it. I learned 32 pronouns that were for that community, and it made me more of a diverse person whenever I had to treat patients coming in. So I think it's important to bring those types of things to light. And being someone that's a blogger, one thing in pop culture, when I thought about this question that came up literally about a week or so ago, and you may have seen it go viral itself, is so many people were shocked that the United Negro College Fund is now have their first Black board member. So people were in shock all these years. People have been donating money and volunteerism and things like that, and realizing that the diversity of that board has not been there to support after all this time, has not been there to support that area. So that leadership, and think of the diversity that could have come from the generations of profound Black people that could have served in those board positions to elevate that organization. So I just wanted to highlight that that was definitely a pop culture moment many of us were in shock about moving forward.
Miss Knight, you mentioned something that was very, very important, and that's about cultural sensitivity and how that is portrayed within our leadership or in our organizations. I know that, and I want to speak to this. I remember in most of the entities, but more recently in the hospital administration, you know, we are hired on and you have this 15-minute video of what cultural sensitivity is. And for many of us in the helping profession or who have pursued degrees or advanced studies understand is that it's a lot of work. Cultural sensitivity cannot be packed or unpacked in a 15-minute video session when you're talking about the various ways that people identify. You know, even something as simple as uh, um, understanding a person's faith, moral compass, and faith beliefs. When you think about working in a hospital setting, and a person doesn't want to get a blood transfusion, I have so many stories, so many stories about cultural sensitivity, and I think that we are doing a terrible injustice to our team members to expect that they will have what they need from a 15-minute training. And I think there needs to be work in that area about how we deliver that.
I'd like to speak
Absolutely.
to that.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead, Ms. Taylor.
For saying that, Dr. Eve, because what I've noticed in my journey to implementing a diversity agenda at the North Carolina Education Lottery is that when I look to find out who's getting diversity training and how does that work, is that the senior leadership are invited to take some type of class with the state government. The state government, maybe through the Department of Human Resources or Office of State Human Resources, may offer these classes, and it appears to me that they may obviously be online or maybe a one-day virtual thing. And it's like, as long as they've taken that class, then they're ready and prepared to manage their staff. Now, only people who manage people take it, but I gotta do a little more digging to figure out what's actually in those classes. Is it the same training over and over, year after year, or is it, do they bring in new information? And again, is it just a one-time thing where they check in the box, or do they have people who can actually say, I've implemented it in various ways, even with how I look at hiring people? So I agree with your point that, you know, I think you said maybe a 1 hour or video training. It's not sufficient.
Yeah, when I took like two,
To that.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Sorry, Dr. Eve.
Yeah, when
I
you think
think
about 4 hours, I'm sorry, go ahead. Let me close.
we both paused and both said, go ahead, but you go ahead, Dr. Eve.
I only wanted to mention how we take, 3-hour courses for 12 weeks to actually become competent. And not only that, that's education. But how is that practice? What does that look like in practice? What does that look like from theory to practice? And so I think it's critical that when we are hiring that we look at those things. Go ahead, Ms.
Absolutely. And one thing that so back to I think Ms. Taylor was talking about the Equal Employment Opportunity and Diversity Fundamentals course that is required for anyone in the state of North Carolina that is a manager or supervisor. And I'm actually trained to teach that course. It used to be 2 full days face-to-face, and now it's several modules online and then face-to-face, and you have to pass quizzes. You see how the assessment is built into that now, and it does update. So that's one thing that I'd like to say I'm happy about that the state of North Carolina has done. I know East Carolina requires training for search committees. Even when my search committee training runs out, I get the email from my own office saying it's time to renew your search committee training, things like that. So we have to put systems and processes in place to hold leadership accountable for moving into 2021. We have to make sure that people, if they're getting paid the 6 figures, then you have to show up. You have to show up. And I put into the chat, assess them on it, make it a part of their annual evaluations, putting using the facts of who you supervise, Ms. Taylor said, moving that into practice, and the ultimate goal, we have to hold these people accountable, whether they look like us or not. We have to hold leadership accountable. So, and I'll let you go, Dr. Kimberly. Everybody's a doctor today. You get a right. I'm calling everybody doctor. Because Dr. Eve is at the bottom, so I see the doctor.
Dr. Eve, yes. But thank you so much, Ms. Jacobs, for that, because I think it is important of accountability to leadership. A lot of times leadership will hold these positions for decades, and there's no accountability assessments done to evaluate their perceptions on how they serve their staff and community that they're serving. And so then you have people end up with implicit bias. And then you have people that still feel they can operate as they did in 1980, whatever, when they started out working in that position, and not thinking about how so much language and conversation has changed. One fun example I will say is one of my friends will say, I couldn't see one of the all-time favorite shows of hers, Martin, to even be possibly able to be on TV today, because so much content that we saw in the 90s, early 90s, things could not be said today as being culturally competent and not causing any type of bias, could not be said in today's tone and atmosphere we live. So we have to understand the evolution of time requires evolution in how we process and think and how we support people. So yeah, thank you so much focus to that.
I'd like to address Alexandria's comment in the chat. She was speaking of how she wants they want to be heard. And I do believe that when we think about diversity as well and inclusion, we must think about all domains. When I say that, I mean intergenerational and intersectional. Meaning when we do that, we cover our body, right? All members of our society, and that's so critical in order to maximize the decision making that is to come in the future. When I think about, I have not a funny but not so funny story. I think that as a leader, we should also know when we have caused harm as well. I have a Gen Z. Well, I have a millennial. I have all of them. I'm a baby boomer, but I have all of them in the house, right? And so my Gen Z, it keeps me on my toes. She holds me accountable in every way. And so I have a story for last year, was fighting so hard for Black people that in my mind, this fight is so hard for Black people that it's real difficult for me to think about anybody else right now, right? So was watching TV the other day, and there was the situation with the Asian hate crimes. And yes, this is a funny but not so funny story. And I'm saying to myself, but why are they hurting these Asian people? And my Gen Z said, well, I tried to tell you last year about assaults on Asian people. And I'm saying, but I still don't get it. Funny but not so funny story. She says, but I still don't get it. And she said, well, Mom, COVID. And I'm like, the light bulb went off in my head. Oh my goodness. I saw these things happening, but the fight was so hard that in the moment for us last year, fighting for our life, fighting for our cause, fighting for our people, fighting for our voice, fighting for our rights, that I couldn't fathom this was happening to another culture in the moment that I couldn't even consider. And so it became a really tough conversation between her and I that night, because I still pushed back, but it was a moment of clarity. It was a moment of humanity that I had to sit with myself and say, everyone matters. And so we have to also be willing to challenge ourselves a little more when our school of thought has been missing. So, yeah.
Thank you for adding that, Dr. Eve, because that really segues into our next question. And I'm so glad you brought that up. Accountability for those Gen Zs, they are so awesome. They are really coming through. And I'm a millennial myself. And so I admire their resilience and their strength and their unapologetic freeness to be who they are. Gen Z is like, I am here and I'm being equitable and I'm being inclusive, and this is how I should be. And they coming up in a social media focused age. My group, millennials, it was social media's beginning. And so for them, it's like this is the norm, what we see now with social media and many practices like this. So kudos to your Gen Zer over there keeping you accountable, Mom. We see her. And that's a great conversation that you got to have, because the hate crimes that have been going on with the Asian community in relation to COVID-19, and so many people feeling that it's because of the Asian community we have the issue of COVID-19, and again, not giving accountability to those powers that be, that are structures and systems that cause this type of oppression to so many minorities, and not holding that leadership accountable is part of my little soapbox issue. But we'll digress from that. But our next question I have for you, and feel free to chime in, is do you think the fight for social justice and change has had an impact on the diversity inclusion landscape? And if so, how? Do you think the fight for social justice and change has had an impact on DEI landscape? And if so, how? And Ms. Jacobs, I'm going to go with you.
Absolutely. Everybody's so woke now. Sorry. I'm just... Ooh, everybody's so woke. Everybody's a performative ally. Yeah. It has had a huge impact on the DE&I landscape. But what it has also shown is that there are a lot of people that are performative allies, and there are a lot of people that have become woke, but are still at level 1. And so I know one of your other questions is about what's difficult about implementing a D&I program. Well, I'm going to try and merge those two, is meeting people where they are. it's difficult for people that are passionate about this work, that have been in this fight forever. You mean to tell me you don't know it? Like someone said about the pronouns, you know, some people act like they've never heard it. And we've been talking about it for a very long time. But I'm thankful that some people are at step one, okay? But social justice has definitely changed the aspect because people are paying attention. But unfortunately, as a DE&I professional that works in this work every day, I've also noticed a shift, only because no one has died on the national news lately that is Black. Okay, I'm being honest. I say it on ECU's platform, I can say it here. So it's nothing I've not discussed in my professional world. Is I think people are becoming, mainly white folk, are becoming tired of talking about race again. And I know that ECU has been on the anti-racism drill platform. Everything we do is about anti-racism for this past year. And some people, you know, are wanting to shift, even though we are talking about all dimensions of diversity. But social justice has definitely changed the landscape by more people paying attention. But it also has heightened my understanding that there's even more work to be done. So I wonder how that is for Dr. Yes, doctor, everybody's a doctor, for Dr. Ferguson.
Yes.
I'm interested in what you have to say about that.
Absolutely.
Sure. So, you know, yes, it absolutely has changed the landscape. You know, before 2020, it was an unspoken norm that organizations did not talk about politics and religion and injustice, right? But there was a call from employees and clients and customers to stand up and say something, and more importantly, to do something, right? And then a requirement that organizations support their employees from a mental health and wellness perspective, because what we were experiencing last year and previous, right, but they became aware of it then, was so much around, you know, COVID, around injustice that we're seeing again and again and again. And, you know, a lot of companies felt unprepared to address the expectations in the moment. Many organizations, you know, have been flirting with the idea of DEI, right? Because the information on the benefits to business was there, but not ready to make the commitment. And then they found themselves in need of help. So getting assistance from organizations with expertise in leveraging DEI for business outcomes, they started to have conversations on how DEI holistically creates more sustainable business. And then they became more open to the investment of time and resources to that end. But, you know, I think it was a situation where they were reactive instead of proactive. And I know that Annette mentioned that in leadership, you have to lead proactively, but they were in a situation where they had to respond and then they were unprepared. And so the question was, you know, what do we do? And so that's why I think, you know, hearing that from their employees and from customers, you know, what are you doing? What are you saying? Was very important to their being open to having these conversations and really making the commitment to DEI.
So much. And just from being in your perspective and being in the type of work that you do, I really appreciate your comments. That really brings light to that. And Ms. Taylor, do you have anything to add to this question here?
Yes, I agree with everyone that it's making. Am I echoing? Can you hear me okay? Okay. I certainly do agree that the social justice movement, it really never changed for people of color anyway, but is making an impact. I agree with all the terms that have been called out in response to your question, Toya, saying woke. I mean, you cannot not use that phrase. I like what Jackie's saying about how companies have been flirting with it. I would say that we were in that category. I just feel it's important to mention that because even though we're trying to determine what our agenda looks like, it doesn't mean that everyone's open to making a statement on social justice and making a statement so that employees feel that you have embraced the plight. And it is something that I did recommend after the George Floyd because people were in such a position, and because people know I'm working on this, you have many people in the company that would just come to you and talk. Like, I'm not elevated in any particular role. I'm not a social worker and I'm not HR, but people have a comfort level and they know that you will listen. I mean, listening is everything, but the person that needs to listen to them is not visible, or the people that need to listen to them do not make them feel comfortable to come to them. So that's where, when we talk about intentionality, the leadership has to be in that place. But there's often also a fear, and so there are people dealing with fear. And I know all of you understand what I'm talking about, but there was no public statement. I mean, many organizations and companies that are at these high levels, the lottery is a $3 billion organization. We have nearly 300 employees across the entire state. And people are from different backgrounds and come from different places, including people whose children may have been downtown Raleigh marching or doing something where they don't know how to manage that in their work. And, the points that I like to make is, yes, people are working from home, but you don't know how productive they're being because they're not feeling what they need to feel. And they're going to potentially be affected by the social justice movement. So I think a simple statement that says, you matter, know that you matter. My door is open. And even if it's not that you're the one talking to them, remind people that there is an EAP available to them. But I think coming out with an email that has this type of state, and if the high level leadership did not want to do it, then managers had the right to do it. I mean, there's a lot of politics that play into trying to be a learning and DEI organization. So I would just leave it there.
Taylor, I agree so, and I think that's so important that you brought that up. I know for me, with my nonprofit Black Indians NC, one of the things for me, my cultural background is pretty diverse. I grew up in a home with a father who's Eastern Band Cherokee, and with my dad, he's Eastern Band and he's also West African, Ivory Coast. My grandmother was first generation Ivory Coast here, so I grew up with a lot of African and cultural background. He was my first language. I learned English about 7, 8 years old. And that's been a pretty public story that I've told. And then with doing this nonprofit work, I noticed when we started having a lot of the focus when it came to racial discrimination, and then also, as I call it, the murders of George Floyd and many others that occurred. When we started to see those things happening on television, I noticed a lot of indigenous communities wanted to stand in solidarity and support. But then when I look at your tribal council and your board, I don't see Black indigenous people present. And that's when I had to step up my little social worker hat and say, hey, we have to talk about this lack of diversity in this tribal leadership, or this lack of diversity of inclusion in tribal communities, and vocalize that and make sure that we are not just here for social media face value, because we do know with the Black Lives Matter movement, there came the change of the Washington Redskins because of that focus on inclusion of that. And there's been many, of course, historical pieces of indigenous organizations and Black organizations working together collectively. But I found in that, like, that's another place where we have to see more inclusion and diversity. And for the chat box over there, I see you chatty.
Yeah, they chatting.
I love it.
I have a little bit of a different perspective, because I'm not in a white led institution anymore. I took the leap, and so glad I did. I'm in a Black led space, and in that Black led space, when I think about this particular conversation, I also think about how we have to also check ourselves. I'm all about, we got to check us too, folks. And by that, I mean, I walked into a space to get clarity on what is white supremacy. What is that, right? And I walk into these spaces, I don't have much to say because I'm here to learn. And when I walked away from that space, what I vowed to do in that moment was to unlearn everything I had ever been taught from corporate, academia, and healthcare. Because if I do not unlearn the practices that I've learned for 30 years, surely I'm going to walk into this black-led space where we are advocating for change, and I am going to cause harm to my own people. Because what is it that I really know other than what I've been taught, other than the European culture, which has trained the way I think about things, aside from my own studies and things that my parents and, of course, my husband has cultivated within me, and the things that I choose to learn for myself, there is still that practice of 30 years of white supremacy that I've got to undo to keep from harming. And every day I wake up to heal from harm from the day before, committed by someone who looks like me. I think it's critical that when we have these conversations, we have them full dimensional, understanding that we got to do some work. We have to do some work. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Eve. That is so profound. There is so much about self accountability that has to come in this space when it comes to this topic at hand and beyond. And thank you for see. We do have a lot of brand new DEI experts in the world now that are starting to pop up and capitalize even on DEI trainings. Yes, they want to be where the money resides. So they are popping up everywhere we see when it comes to that. So shifting that focus, have you yourself experienced bias, racism, or any form of inequity? If so, how did you overcome this? How did you address it? Do you think this is different for white women in the situations you have been in? Let's talk about it. Mrs. Jacobs, I see you shaking your head. Let's talk about it.
Absolutely. I have been experienced bias, racism, any form of inequality you can think of. How I overcome it is to be great and to build community and to create community for others that are coming after me. Someone mentioned earlier, I think it was Felicia during the health segment. Folks are like, as soon as we graduate from ECU, we want to leave Greenville. And I get asked often, Miss Jacobs, why are you still there? Because they keep enrolling them. That's why I'm still there. I have a purpose. I have a purpose. So nothing formed against me is going to stop me from helping the next generation. Annette said earlier, she stopped by my office. I am Aunt Toya to so many students on the campus. That's a recent thing. I don't think my 90s and early 2000s students know about Aunt Toya, but that's what they call me now.
You were probably Sister Toya then.
Or they were. I was young, and they were like, "Well, I don't know. Can I call you Toya?" No, you cannot.
Yeah, you were not auntie age when I was there.
I wasn't auntie age.
You were sister age.
Yeah, but I love it now, and it's going to get me through the next 9 years. So even though those things have happened to me, it hasn't stopped my purpose. So I'll let somebody else talk before I get emotional. But yes, I have experienced it. The way to fight it is to help others not experience it.
Absolutely. You've done a tremendous work over at East Carolina. I'm telling you, being at a predominantly white institution, I can truly say the LaDonia Wright Cultural Center made us feel an HBCU presence, even though we were at a PWI. So thank you, and Dr. Taylor and everyone else that's supported the center for that. So thank you. Ms. Ferguson, do you have to add to this question about experiencing bias, racism, or any form of inequity? And if so, how did you overcome this and how did you address it? And do you think it's different for white women?
So yes, definitely. And I think this is a good time to talk about intersectionality, right? Which is how multiple aspects of diversity combine to create a unique experience. And for me, I'm Black, I'm a woman, also neurodiverse. So I've experienced, all the slights, all the, and as a Black woman professional, I've had to prove my credibility and authority on topics that white men are given at the door, right? And just to mention again, Major Stormer's need to know wall, right? I love that. And as a person with dyslexia, I often want to take more time gathering my thoughts and thinking all the way around an issue or idea before speaking. And so I've very often in the past been spoken over, not given space in meetings to respond. But because I think in a nonlinear way, I tend to identify issues and roadblocks faster than most. And, there was just a long time as I started my career that I didn't speak up. I was being polite or I didn't have the confidence to speak up. But you have to advocate for yourself and you have to advocate for others. I challenge assumptions through questions like, what are you implying? Or why do you feel that way? Or, is there a reason that you're doing this thing or that thing? It's like turning around and looking someone in the face of their ignorance, right? And I'm at a point now in my career where I'm not spoken over. But, it's a simple I'm speaking, right? Which we all heard in the vice presidential debate resonated with women and neurodiverse people everywhere. Something that simple can be the most powerful. And, it can be different for white women. They don't always have the intersectional challenges of multiple aspects of diversity that many of us do. And therefore, they don't have to deal with multiple levels of bias.
Absolutely. Thank you, Ms. Ferguson. And thank you for bringing light to how your dimensional way of learning and how that's been for you. I think that's so beautiful to speak on that. And a lot of times we don't think about all of the different aspects of how people who are in leadership or our employees, how they learn and diversify and bring that diverse perspective to places of leadership. So thank you for acknowledging that. And Ms. Taylor, do you have anything to add to our question here about experiences yourself of bias, racism, or any form of inequity? If so, how did you overcome this and how did you address it? And do you think this is different for white women?
Yes, thank you for that question. The answer is definitely yes. I've experienced racism even in salaries, when you're on the same level or higher. Obviously, I've worked in companies where I have a master's and actually many more years of experience than someone come in their 20s with a bachelor's of the other race, and they make more money than I and advance faster than I. So I'll leave that there. I've had a very different experiences, and because I have worked, I still work in corporate, and I'm not speaking to this particular company per se, but in other companies I've worked in. And what I do is take my, after a while, I take my me wall, I need to know wall somewhere where I'm appreciated. But I love that. Didn't I love that? That was so profound. It's not a me wall, it's a need to know wall. It's not about me, it's about you and what you think. And so I just want to, let you know who I am. I've been just like many other, women of color who are nice. I'm busy being nice, but nice does not necessarily get you paid. So, but it's a comfort level that you have to create and really assess who you're dealing with. And once you know who you're dealing with, you have to do what Maya Angelou said. If you can't change things, change yourself. And that's what I do.
I love it, Ms. Taylor. Thank you so much. As we close out this wonderful conversation with each of you, especially thank Dr. Eve, Mrs. Jacobs, Ms. Ferguson, and Ms. Taylor for your contributions to this conversation about diversity, equity, and inclusion. We are now about to be joined by Editor-in-Chief Evelyn to come in and give us some closing remarks. And I want to thank you for this opportunity to moderate this amazing panel. And to everyone out there listening today, know your worth and your value and trust that process. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Kimberly. That panel was the perfect way to wrap up today. I think it really just wrapped everything in a bow from what we talked about today when we started out with community policing and business, mental health and wellness. These are things that, you know, when we walk into a room, a lot of times they just see the outward shell. You know, they tend to lump us into a category depending on what we look like. But there's so many different layers to this. And I love what Sheriff Dan said earlier this morning of, you know, she wouldn't have been able to afford to go to the academy had she not been in a position and had her husband there to back her financially. You know, Toya talked about, you know, having to nurture her students while still being in a professional environment where maybe sometimes you're challenged, you know, a place where you have poured into these people and you have paid your dues, so to speak. We are hit with labels. You know, everyone wants to just put a label on us for everything. And two things that I learned last year. Number one, we are short on time. You know, time speeds up. So, you know, when Toya was talking about, you know, going, you know, to ECU and, you know, giving Greg his first job, I'm looking like, wow, look how much time has passed. You know, I blinked and I was in my 40s. I don't know where the time went, but it's here and it's now. Starting over doesn't have to be scary though. You know, we also have to be life learners. And I like to say, if you're not a work in progress, you should be a work in progress. If you're not a work in progress, then that means you're stagnant. We like to really just lean on that term, the definition of substantial, strongly built and made. We definitely have to live that every single day and be unapologetic for it. I am just grateful for everyone and their gems that they talked about today. People, you know, the chat box was going off. You guys have some great questions. Again, if you didn't get your questions answered, if there are other things, please reach out to us on social media, send us a message. We love to hear from you guys. We do these things for you. We create these platforms to have meaningful dialogue. And through these meaningful dialogues, we can be able to really impact things. We can impact some of those policies, some of those things that we're upset about that we think that need to be changed. It starts with us. We have a collective responsibility to be involved in every aspect of it and to support one of us. So thank you again. I just really can't tell you how full I am just to see everyone come and spend their time with us today on a Saturday. If you are not subscribed to our list, make sure that you put your name on that email list. We're going to be sharing out all of the amazing things. Greg and I are on roller skates right now. We have so many things. And I think Adia said it best, just having that just crazy amount of creativity and wanting to do everything. You know that it cannot be done all at one time. Rome was not built in a day, but we're going to do our best to make sure that we bring you all of the impactful things that you guys need and want. So thank you again. And have a wonderful afternoon and share your notes with your friends who were not able to be here. We had a lot of people on social media that had FOMO because they did not register in time. So make sure that you go out and you share these gems with other people and tell them about how substantial we had of a day that we had today. Thank you so much. Have a great afternoon. Bye.